Okay, perfect. So the recording's done. Okay, today we are doing Learning Unit 2, Theme 1 and Theme 2. So majority of this learning unit is coming out of strategic sourcing, sort of supplier engagement, the difference between in-sourcing, outsourcing, the sort of benefits, the risks, etc. And as we go along, you'll understand it a little bit better in terms of sometimes a lot of businesses feel that insource or outsourcing is a bad route and insourcing is probably the way to go. I know I've seen it in my previous lifetime at my previous company where they opted to insource a lot of logistical routes. And sometimes this doesn't always make financial sense for the business. So having a good strategic sourcing process does help the case because the ownership is on your supplier and you can then hold your supplier accountable for whatever it is, whether it's raw materials or whether they are doing you a service, but it just allows you to hold somebody else accountable. So I'll try and share as many examples as we go along, just so that you have a better understanding. So the first thing that we're going to go into is strategic sourcing. And firstly, we want to understand what the definition of strategic sourcing is. So the textbook definition is as you see in this on the screen right now. And I think where we sit at from a strategic sourcing perspective, we want to look at it as a supply sort of management process where you analyze what your business's buying needs are or purchasing needs are, and then you try and develop a comprehensive strategy to meet those needs, whether it is by ensuring that you have a supplier that is the cheapest or the most efficient that can get you the best product at the quickest time. Whatever your requirement is in terms of business, that's how you now need to develop your strategic sourcing process. From a traditional perspective, when you're looking at it from a traditional sourcing, a lot of times what happens is they focus on very price-based transactions or price-based decisions, whereas strategic sourcing is more of like a long-term benefit. So I've had my fair amount of being in sales and sales from a logistics perspective. And I've seen many businesses and industries focus on traditional sourcing, which is purely price-based decisions, where it'll be deliver from point A, from let's say Durban to Johannesburg, and you're £2 more expensive, so I'm not going to use you. But there's so many other value adds or solutions I can impact the business with, whether it means me offering a better insurance policy or it means me getting your item there quicker by 2 days, which means that you're getting paid 2 days earlier. There's cash, your cash flow is better in 2 days. I have less pilferage. There's various other solutions or value adds that I can offer you. Whereas if we had gone through this relationship from a strategic sourcing perspective, you'll see a lot more of a long-term benefit and possibly even a long-term saving as opposed to going the traditional, price-based decisions. So when we look at strategic sourcing specifically, we want to understand where we at from a supplier relationship management perspective. So we want to maintain very strong relationship with suppliers. So key suppliers that make an impact within your business. You want to ensure that you have long-term collaboration with them. They're also reliable. So if you pick up the phone and you say, I'm out of item X, Y, and Z, they are able to then say, okay, I can deliver this within 2 days to you. And you can actually take that for face value and, build your operations or your production around that 2 days. It also a lot of times involves working very closely with suppliers where you want to improve quality, you want to reduce your cost, and also you want to push innovation as much as possible. If you are going the traditional price-based decision, a lot of times what happens is it becomes very transactional. So you're getting an item because you placed an order online. you're not having monthly KPI meetings with suppliers where, as your business is changing and your landscape is changing in terms of your goals and visions, your suppliers' landscape needs to change as well. So this is where supplier relationship management becomes absolutely important and very a fundamental part of your business as well. Then we want to look at total cost of ownership. So we call it TCO. It's basically where you're not only considering the price, your purchase price of your product or that service, but other costs. What is the logistics cost? What is the maintenance cost? What is the disposal? You want to understand the true cost over an entire life cycle. So a lot of times people, there's hidden agendas and you want to understand or break down that hidden agendas to make the process a lot more transparent. So you want to understand what the TCO is. And you want to consider everything else and not just the purchase price. Then we go into something called market analysis. So you want to understand the market or the supply market, the different forces of supply as well as your different forces of demand, so that you can make very informed decisions when it comes to sourcing strategies or how best you can do your sourcing strategically. It can be like where you are evaluating potential risks from the supplier side, whether it is your supplier doesn't have stability, maybe they are going through a financial constraint, maybe they're going through some sort of liquidation. You don't want to put your eggs in one basket if this is word on the street, basically. You want to understand any sort of geopolitical factors, whether there's a war that's happening, like Ukraine and Russia, for instance. You don't want to necessarily get a supplier sitting in Russia. It'll be impossible for you to get goods out in and out of of the country. And if you do, it's pretty pricey. And any sort of market trends. If there's a new development in the States, for instance, you want your supplier to jump on what that new development is so they can bring some sort of innovation through market analysis into the model. Then we want to look at it from a spend analysis perspective. You want to review sort of historic spending, by using any sort of data that you have, to identify any opportunities for cost savings. Maybe it means you consolidating suppliers. Maybe it means economies of scale where you're giving all the suppliers or all your resources or logistical requirements or even raw material supply to one supplier. So you're consolidating everything and you're getting economies of scale, because then you can negotiate better terms with them. You can also switch to different alternative materials, different alternative services. And I think a lot of blue chips nowadays are going through the process of doing a spend analysis at least once every 2 years, because it also keeps them abreast of market conditions, whether they're being billed correctly or charged correctly, whether there's innovation within their business that their suppliers are bringing. If you have a supplier for 10 years and you see the supplier when you ask to see the supplier, unfortunately, that's not a strategic relationship. You want to be able to see a supplier on a monthly basis and form a relationship with them. And then the last one is sustainability and ethics. So you want to ensure that whatever decision you make from a sourcing perspective, it aligns with your business goals or your business values or mission statements, whether it means you have a sustainability criteria. For instance, maybe you want to go into better recycling or maybe a better carbon footprint or green logistics. Whatever your sustainability policy is, you want your supplier to align with it in the same way. You also want to go through an ethical sourcing, so no bribery and corruption. You want a supplier that is, there because they are fulfilling the job from A to Z, and not because they've bribed you to now be onto the supplier list. And then anything from a CSR. So a lot of times in a lot of big businesses, they include their suppliers when they're doing corporate social responsibility. So if they're going out to, let's say, an old age home or a orphanage or whatever it is, they sort of align with their partners or suppliers so that they make a bigger impact. So you'll see that a lot of times there's like different big brands, and with those brands, they have brand association with smaller brands who most often than not are their suppliers. Okay, so I think when you look at all of these different factors, and I think all of us know this at the end of the day, because at some stage we all looked for a supplier, whether it meant you would get married, you had a birthday party that you needed to do a decor or food or whatever it is. You had to at some stage look for a service provider, and most often than not, you don't always go for the cheapest. You go for the person that gives you something that's according to your vision. So if you're looking at it completely from that perspective, you know all these 6 points. So when you integrate all of these different elements together, your strategic sourcing itself, it helps businesses to have a better supply chain. So to optimize their supply chain, helps them to reduce their costs as much as possible, gives them better quality and also better reliability, of their goods or of their services. Okay. Is there any questions so far from this slide? To those who have just joined us, we have only begun. I think you can catch the recording for the first part that you've missed. So then we go into a little bit of outsourcing. Okay, so still from a supplier perspective, but we want to look at it from a outsourcing perspective. All right. So when we think outsourcing, it's basically where you are buying any sort of material or any component from a supplier instead of you making it yourself. So instead of it making it in-house, you're now buying this material from somebody else. It's basically the process of you contracting out a business that you may have previously done before, but it just didn't make sense for you to continue doing it. So you're going to somebody where it is their core competency or it's their core business to basically create that product or make that product, etc. So when we look at the different drivers specifically for outsourcing, um, and these are sort of the reasons why someone would go into outsourcing more specifically. The first one is you want to look at it from a cost perspective. Consider this: cost is a very important reason for you wanting to outsource, especially if it's a product or a component within your business that is a non-essential product. In order for you to continue your operations. So for instance, Toyota, let's look at that. Their core product is to produce vehicles. Okay. They may look at outsourcing various factors like the foam that goes into the seats. So that would be outsourcing from that perspective. Okay. So you can look at it from many, many other terms. Like if you're having your kid's birthday party, for instance, you now consider using somebody that does party packs. And it's their core competency where they get various different items, paint sets and puzzles and all of that. And they pop it into a little pretty basket, and that becomes your kid party pack as opposed to you making it yourself and doing it yourself. So you're now giving it to somebody that it's their sort of core competency, and it's non-essential for you in terms of you just want the party to happen. Okay. um, then we look at limited facilities. So from a limited facility perspective, especially when you have a lack of production capacity, so you don't have enough space for you to run the production, um, you most often than not push it out to an outsourcing side. So this happens when your demand grows erratically, and when your expansion strategies sort of fall behind. So a lot of times what happens is when you grow steadily over time, the business looks at expanding, maybe getting a bigger facility, if CapEx allows for it, but you now want to go into some sort of expansion. But if your demand grows erratically and rapidly and it doesn't speak to your expansion strategies, then you now fail to meet your demand. Therefore, a lot of times businesses opt to go outsourcing for various elements of different components within the manufacturing process in order for them to still have a finished product at the end and still supply to that demand. Um, then we have lack of expertise. So a lot of times you want a specialist in a particular product or a particular raw material component to produce that item. So internally, if you have to do it yourself, you will lack the expertise because you don't have somebody who's a specialist in there. So by outsourcing it, a lot of times those businesses may have the best technology, the best expertise, the best innovation to manufacture that item. Therefore, it's the best option to basically look at it from an outsourcing perspective. Core business, very similarly to what we had spoken about a little bit earlier, but it's sort of the primary activity that pushes a business, you know, to generate revenue, etc. So when you concentrate on what your core business is specifically, it's an advantage to your business. So everything that's not a core and it's a subsequent activity, for instance, those should be then outsourced. And then from a quality side, a business a lot of times will take advantage of suppliers who have better technology, better processes, maybe better laborers, and also economies of scale. So you can think about a business that, let's say, is producing the ink that goes inside the pen. They are not only producing it for you, they're producing it for a million other buyers. They now have economies of scale. So when they're selling it to you, because it's already run on a machine or some sort of technological device, they are selling it to you at a reduced rate. Okay, so you're looking at it from a quality perspective, taking advantage of economies of scale. A lot of times suppliers invest in, different, just want to check that everyone's here. They try and invest in different, research, different developments, etc. And this is what makes their quality superior than if you have to do it on your own. Okay. So now we're going to go on to the flip side, because it's not always positive when we're talking about outsourcing different activities within the business. So the first one is, so drivers of making basically means where you are making it yourself and the benefit of you making it yourself, and sort of the disadvantage to you now outsourcing the item. So the first one is unreliable suppliers. So a lot of times it happens when your items, your raw material components, or even if you're from a logistics perspective, you start consistently delivering late or receiving your items late. Maybe it's incomplete, maybe it's damaged. So you basically, your suppliers then fall below the required level that you need them to be. So in a lot of times, those unreliable suppliers do not necessarily survive in the competitive market. So either you decide that you can in-source this function, you want to do it on your own. So from a logistics perspective, a lot of times that's what businesses do. For instance, if you have a route that is a problem route and it's now outsourced, and you can't control that supplier, every time you ask for a meeting, the supplier doesn't arrive or pitch up, their billing is inconsistent, they're charging you way more than they're supposed to charge you, they don't have their documentation in order, there's no PODs, whatever the case may be. So now I decide, okay, I'm going to control it on my own. And with this decision, I now want to in-source this particular route. By doing that, I get my own vehicle, I get my own driver, and I'll put them on the road. Yes, the first few weeks are going to be troubled. It's going to be, where they are trying to find their feet, etc. But over time, you now get into the swing of things like learning a bike, riding a bike, and then it becomes free flowing afterwards. And I can control all those other secondary activities, PODs and billings and all of those things. Then the next one is protecting your proprietary technology. So a lot of times businesses invest their money in technology so that they can improve their processes, have a better production schedule. So it's very important that they protect any sort of proprietary technology. So a business may have maybe developed equipment or a product or a different process. So it needs to be protected for the sake of competitive advantage. So a lot of times they try and do like NDAs or little patents or something like that. And it then helps them to be protected. But a lot of times what happens is, if a supplier tends to have wind or of what that product is or that technology is, they can then try and be ahead of the game and create new and better products ahead of the competition, allowing that business to now charge a premium price on a specific item. So you want to try and avoid that and protect as much of your state secret as possible. Then also, from a design perspective, speaks very similarly. So a few companies have a specific design that they make, and they want to keep certain aspects secret as part of their design or part of their manufacturing. So like what do they call it? Like the artwork that goes behind like printing of, let's say, Simba chips. You don't want somebody to get hold of that artwork and now start producing packets of Simba chips, because it now does 100% affect their product in the market, where they can be now overshadowed, or um, uh, a lot of fake products then tend to end up on the marketplace as well. Using existing idle capacity. So a lot of times the short-term solution, for the business with having too much of idle capacity, is to use that excess capacity to make some of its components. So let's say you have a specific machinery that's lying idle for a long time because it's only used for certain functions. You now try and use that machine to produce the different components that you were previously outsourcing, um, especially when it comes to different seasonalities, etc. Then you have a lack of competent suppliers. So if, for instance, your supplier doesn't have the technology or the capability to produce a specific item that you require, the business a lot of times have no choice but to produce it themselves from an in-house perspective, even if it's from a short-term staging time. They still have to be able to produce it. So a lot of times what happens is suppliers may not always be competent in specific fields, or the supplier may be someone that is overseas, where the time frame to get specific products just doesn't make any sense. And then the last one is having better quality control. So if your business is capable, the make option here specifically allows for them to have direct control over their design, their manufacturing, the labor, any other input within their business to make sure that they have high quality products, and they're building high quality products. So you can have better control over it because you're doing it according to what your tick box is in terms of your SOP and your way of thinking, and it does help the case 100%. Is there any questions so far before I continue? All right. Okay, then we're going into your sort of supplier selection and how best you sort of need to evaluate your supplier suitability and different factors that you need to consider. And you can see a lot of this is a little bit of repetition based on our first slide, but it's also points that you need to 100% be aware of when you are deciding to go into evaluating a supplier or selecting a supplier. So product and process technologies, do they have the right technology in order for them to produce your product? Are they willing to share their technology? So when you go into a strategic relationship with the supplier, as your business grows, their business grows, are they then able to share ways of which they are growing and what sort of information or strategy or technology they've used, and how can it best be used to build your business as well? Quality, you want a supplier that is of the quality that you want your product to be and to be sold in the market. You will also want it to be as cost efficient as possible. You want them to be reliable in terms of, if you do have an emergency, they come to your rescue. Order system and cycle time. So how order system and cycle time would work is basically when you are needing a specific component, raw material, product, or even a service from a logistics or a transport perspective, you need to understand what the timeframes are, and your supplier needs to now share with you what is doable and what's not doable. You need to now build in that time frame within your cycle time. So a cycle time is basically how long it takes you from point of inception, so at a raw material stage, right down to a delivered stage. What is that time? Is it a week? Is it 2 weeks? And at the different stages of manufacturing, quality control, dispatch, pick and packing, sub-assemblies, and then delivery, what is that time frame in each step of the way? Okay. Does your supplier have the capacity to take you on as a buyer, and will they then be able to fulfill you or fulfill your orders at the end of the day? Is there good communication with your supplier? So when you are in a predicament, is your supplier there to help you at the end of the day? Are they there to if you need anything at all, are they there to support you? Location, so where's your supplier based? A lot of times, and I'll switch to more from a service now, and from a logistics perspective, location is a big factor. You obviously want someone, if you are wanting something collected and delivered the next day, can they now get to you? And if they can, then what is the delivery expectation? And then most importantly, we want good service. Okay, so when you're evaluating your supplier, they need to be able to provide you with good service on a monthly basis, be able to have a KPI with them, or a SLA meeting or a business review meeting, whatever you want to call it, just so that you make sure that everything is being maintained at the end of the day. So what was promised at the beginning from a contractual perspective, you are still, getting it going at the end. So all these little terms that I'm now speaking about, with supply selection, outsourcing, etc., I would put a lot of relevance into the whole outsourcing criteria. I've been lecturing this module. This is now my fourth year, not fourth year, but fourth semester lecturing this module. Outsourcing came out every single time, whether it was in assignment or in an examination. So it is a very important topic, and also what we're going to go through next in terms of single sourcing and multiple sourcing, as well as strategic sourcing, sort of what's your different supplier selection criteria. All of these points are absolutely important. So please remember this. And as we go along, we'll spend a little bit more time, especially with our support sessions, so you understand all of this. And if you are stuck in any way, to pick up your hand or message me or email me or do whatever you need to understand it just a little bit more. Okay. Then we go into the KPIs specifically. And, when we're looking at it from a performance matrix side, so this is key performance indicators or performance matrix. It's quite critical when we're looking at it from a strategic sourcing side. So a lot of times the following, the bottom, as you see those factors there, they are what's more commonly used when we select and evaluate suppliers, And also you want to monitor their ongoing performance. So you'll see there's so much of repetition, which is good. Repetition is always good. But these are just, key items that we look for. So when we look at it from a cost perspective, we want to look at their pricing compared to competitors, their TCO, so the total cost of ownership. So not just the price, but every price that's associated, shipping, handling, taxes, duties, life cycle costs, and then payment terms. Do they have flexibility in terms of payment terms that's offered by the, in terms of the supplier offering payment terms to you? Is it 30 days, 60 days? 60 days does help with your cash flow, 90 days even better. So you just need to understand it from that perspective. Quality factors. What is the product quality? So you obviously want consistency and reliability from that perspective. What sort of certifications does the supplier have? So a lot of times, if your product is something that is accredited, what is the different ISOs that your supplier has? 9000, 9001. Maybe it is a triple BE, because when you go deal with suppliers that's on a lower BE level, then it does help the cost for yourself. And then anything from a testing side, the robustness of your suppliers, quality control process, all of that. Then it's delivery performance. So is your supplier able to meet the different delivery schedules? How long does it take them? A cycle time perspective. And if you do have any sort of changes in your orders, can your supplier then accommodate your changes and also accommodate the delivery schedules? Then we have capacity and capability. Is the supplier able to then meet what your current volumes are, your future volumes are, what's your demand, etc.? And then any sort of resource side, what resources are available, skilled labor, any materials, any sort of technology. Financial, what is the financial stability or financial health of your supplier? Whether it's financial statements, different credit ratings, etc. Do they run a risk of bankruptcy? So all of these things you now need to take into account when you're looking at different performance metrics of a supplier. What is their compliance? What is their risk management in terms of sustainability, ethical sourcing, corporate social responsibility, which we've gone through already. From an innovation and continuous improvement side, they must be able to offer you new products, offer you improved products, different, improved processes, etc. And also have continuous improvement. So they need to show evidence of their commitment to showing you continuous improvement, whether they're using different supply chain criteria like Lean and Six Sigma. Then relationship management, communication, which we spoke about. Are they a good culture fit to your business? From a values or an ethics perspective. And then what is your supplier relationship management tool that you're using? So on a monthly basis, when you are running different KPIs with them, what tool are you then using to tick the boxes to make sure that they are delivering? And then location, so geographical considerations, what's the lead time, logistics costs, etc. Okay, then we're going to look at supplier base specifically. So the first one is your supplier base is basically a list of suppliers that the business uses to get its materials, its services, and different suppliers for equipment, etc. So the supplier base itself is sort of like whether it can be broad, it can be lean, it can be local, national, international, diverse. It's basically everything. So a lot of times businesses sort of engage in different supply chain management um, you know uh, key points that shows or emphasizes long-term supplier alliances, etc. And the supplier base does help to broadly understand where your suppliers sort of fit in. So you may use supplier one for a particular raw material, supplier 2 for logistical activities, supplier 3, maybe it's logistical activities in the north. But by doing the due diligence and getting everybody onto a supplier base, it does help the cause 100%. So you're not trying to pick and choose reactively. You want to be proactive, and everyone needs to already be on there. Then we're going into supplier base specifically, and single sourcing is what we're looking at. And when we're looking at single sourcing specifically, we firstly want to understand. And single sourcing is using just one supplier, not multiple suppliers, as it states. You want to establish a good relationship. So when you're using a single supplier, it makes it a lot easier for the business to understand whether you guys have a mutually beneficial, whether it's a strategic relationship or strategic alliance, where the business can then benefit from any sort of technology or any sort of capability that the supplier has. Then you have less quality variability. So when you use a single supplier, the same technology, the same process are used to produce the part. So the quality varies very little, as opposed to when you are now purchasing from a whole host of different suppliers. You also have a lower cost because you now have economies of scale. Whereas, so they most times they're not, they're lowering the purchase cost per unit. So with single sourcing, you don't have duplicate fixed costs. You don't have like expensive setups or startups, etc. Everything, it just sort of runs. Then we got the transport economics of it. So because when you're looking at single sourcing, a lot of times it concentrates on volume. So business can take advantage of having like a full truckload from supplier to myself, for instance, which is cheaper than per unit than if you're going on an LCL basis where it's a less than container load, and then you are trying to move less items, but it's also you're moving it from multiple different suppliers. So I hope you sort of understood where I was coming from in that perspective. Moving from one point to another point with economies of scale and a lot of product is a lot cheaper than moving it from 3 or 4 different locations at a lower quantity. Then you have a, when we say proprietary product or process purchases, we want to look at the supplier that holds from a patent perspective. So they're holding the rights of a specific product. The business has no choice but to buy from a single source. So a lot of businesses like a Nike, for instance, that supplies in South Africa, has Nike shops. They can't now decide in South Africa they want to change up and do their own design, etc. The sort of patent for Nike sits in, I don't even know where it sits, but it's manufactured in Vietnam. That part I know. So very similarly, the brand Salomon, the rights of it is international, but there's Salomon shops here. So it's where your proprietary product is. You don't have a choice but to use a single supplier. You can't decide that you want to go to a factory down the road and ask them to manufacture Salomon shirts, for instance, or produce Salomon shoes. And then the last one, it's the volume is too small to split. So if your requirement is very small in terms of the volume of either a component or a raw material, it's not worthwhile to basically split the order between multiple suppliers. So single sourcing is the best option in that regard, especially if it's sort of like non-vital, sort of important components that form part of your supply chain or your product. And then the last one is what we call multiple suppliers, right? So when we look at the different reasons for favoring multiple suppliers, the first one is the need for capacity. So when the demand sort of exceeds the capacity of just having one single supplier, the business has no choice but to go out and look for multiple suppliers. So if you ask your supplier to produce ink, for instance, and they're not producing ink for a lot of other people, and your delivery timeline is taking too long, your production timeline is taking too long, and your demand has now increased substantially, that you know the supplier cannot handle it, you now go out to market and you find various different suppliers. So I hope you can see the pros and cons with both single sourcing and multiple suppliers. Then the next one is spreading the risk of supply interruption. So when we're looking at that from a multiple supplier perspective, it allows the business to spread the risk out to various different suppliers, especially when there's sort of unforeseen circumstances like a strike, for instance. So with there being a strike, um, for instance, you now have not one supply in one location, you have now multiple suppliers in various different locations that can still have business continuity at the end of the day. Then you create competition, which competition is always good. Healthy competition is the best. So when you're using multiple suppliers, it encourages the competition between all of them, whether it's from a price perspective or a quality perspective. So especially when we're looking at it from a modern day and age, sort of philosophical guide, a lot of times it discourages the use of multiple sources in order to create competition, but it's still a preferred route a lot of the times. So especially in a highly competitive environment, like a logistics space, for instance, where there's every man that has a van and wants to do deliveries. A lot of times this does create healthy competition, especially for the customer themselves, because they then start horse trading with different suppliers. So from a price perspective, it does work. Quality side, it's still a little bit iffy on whether that works out or not. Okay, and then the last one is it's basic information. So a lot of times when you have a lot of different suppliers, they usually have more information about market conditions, whether there's new product developments, maybe your supplier travels on these different trade fairs and they go into first world countries and they learn different ways of production and processes, etc. And they bring in new technology. So it does help. Especially if your product has a sort of short product life cycle, so you need to move fairly quickly in terms of production and getting the product sold. Information does help a lot of times, especially if you are not able to get to having, view of what the market conditions are. You do have different suppliers that you have relationships with that can now take you through this. Okay, and then to finish off, this is basically just the sourcing process, and you'll see this, in your textbook and when you're doing additional resources, additional sourcing in terms of work. And I'll go through it very quickly. So firstly, as a business, you need to identify your needs, okay? Or if you do already know your needs, reevaluate what your needs are. Then you need to understand what the requirements are going to be and decide whether you are going to make this or you're going to buy it, meaning you're going to in-source it or outsource it. Identify what type of purchases you want. Is it different components? Is it different raw materials? Is it transport, logistics, etc.? Then do different market analysis in order for you to find different possible suppliers. Identify the different possible suppliers. Conducting market analysis, I mean, you could go to someone who's a competitor of yours and research a competitor of yours to understand what suppliers they are using, so you can then go into the identification stage. You then pre-screen these suppliers, and then evaluate the remaining of your supplier base. So understand whether if you have 10 suppliers on your base, do you really need the 10? Maybe you can cut them down to 3. Choose who your suppliers are going to be, and then basically just get them to deliver the product or perform the service that you want them to do, and then have an after sale or an after process sort of debriefing session where you're able to then say, okay, this didn't work, that didn't work, let's change this, let's put this into the new KPI. So that's very important as well. So strategic sourcing is a little bit of a complicated process. There's a lot of interrelated tasks that needs to go into it specifically. And as you can see just from these 11 sort of different steps, but it's also an approach to having a good supply chain process. You formalize the way that you have the information or you gather the information, and you also have a little bit of a better purchasing power when it comes to your supplier. Whether it is a component supplier or a service supplier, you do have better leverage, especially from a marketplace perspective. And a supplier can actually make or break you in the market. Okay, from a logistics perspective, if I am delivering for an item, a customer that sells e-commerce, let's say it's Amazon, for instance, and I keep delivering every single time I deliver the products late and late and late and late, the actual reputational damage doesn't go to myself as a supplier, it goes to Amazon directly. People don't want to buy from Amazon anymore because now they're delivering 10, 15 days later. Let me rather go to Take a Lot because Take a Lot will have next day delivery. So they now opt to go to the competition purely because a supplier has now let them down. So understanding what your sourcing process is and having the debrief KPI sort of business review session after is absolutely important. And there's various different types of models too that you can basically do from a sourcing process side. A lot of people go through the RFP or RFQ, so request for proposal, request for quotation. I always like the RFP route because you tend to not only look at things from a traditional pricing side, but you tend to also look at it from a solution and value add and what different can the supplier bring to my business point of view. Okay, and I think that basically takes us to the end of our session here today with I think 7 minutes to spare. Is there any questions? This is actually a really, really nice topic. It's something that you can, quite nicely explore. And as I said to you, over the last, 4 semesters or 2 years that I've taken the module, supplier strategic sourcing, sourcing process, single-use suppliers and multiple suppliers all have come out at one or another assessment. So make it your priority to go in a little bit deeper and understand it a little bit more. I know there's only so much that we can do in class, but it does help. Okay. If there's no questions, please have a fantastic day. Just a repeat of those that missed the beginning session. Assignment 1 and assignment 2 has been loaded on ARC. Please make sure that you're going through those assignments a week before or the last live lecture before the assignment is due. I will do a support session to take you through a PACER, etc. Your ISTAS 1 has been loaded already. That due date is next week, Tuesday. So you have a week to now complete that due date. The good thing is it's completely based on what we did today. So good luck on that one. The slides for this will be available today. I will post it right now. The recording, however, will be available tomorrow. Sometimes what happens when the recording does go over 45 minutes or half an hour, it does take long to download. So I will make sure to get that going by tomorrow morning. You will have that recording on YouTube. Okay. Is there any questions from anybody? Well, we have some time. Okay. All right, guys, have a fantastic day. I will see you not next week, the following week, but next week will be a recording session. Thank you.